the color became so synonymous with fast cars that it stems all the way back to this Peking to Paris rally. How's it going, everyone, and welcome to our first official episode of the Motorist Podcast. My name is Miles McCormick, and in today's episode, Jake Pullen and myself discuss the intricacies and oddities of automotive racing colors. If you aren't already following us, please do make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, my name is Miles McCormick, and you're listening to the Motorist Podcast. Enjoy. Websites launching this week. Websites launching this week.
Everybody go climb Pikes Peak.
Way to keep it on brand there. In case you guys didn't know, we have a website that's launching this week. We're kind of stoked about it. We've worked really hard on it, trying to get it to pump out for you guys as fast as possible. We're going to have a blog on there written by yours truly. We're going to have photographs by myself and Jake. We're going to have all sorts of media. In the future, we have a store coming where you can buy merch, custom stuff that's all sorts of motorist related, whether that be our brand or just auto stuff in general. What I'm trying to say is we have crazy amounts of ideas and crazy creative merch ideas that we can't wait to show off for you guys. So check out our website, themotorist.net or .org or the Motorist Podcast. Anything that you want to describe us as, I'm sure we've bought the domain for. So check it out.
Now that's kind of a flex. Let's just keep it humble here.
Okay, we honestly bought like 2 domains. We're keeping it poor. Anyway, also on top of that, make sure to check out us on Instagram for your daily informative and entertaining content pertaining to the classic car industry. Check out our episode 0 if you want an introduction on ourselves and some more backstory. But anyway, let's get real. We're going to talk about racing colors today. Basically, I mean, you know racing colors. There's British racing green, Rosso Corsa red, French racing blue, the Germans. I don't know about them. You know, Bruce McLaren, you know, he might have been a Kiwi, but that guy, I don't know what's up with the orange. So if we're going to get into it, I think it's only right that we start with America because we're American. You know, a lot of people love to focus on the Ferraris, on the British, on all of this. I mean, for even F1 these days is a strictly like British centered motorsport event. It's no longer like a national thing. Like British headquarters for F1 is in England. So America, when we were starting off racing, you know, back in 1899, this guy Gordon Bennett, the son of the founder of the New York Herald, wanted to go racing with these newfound inventions called the automobile. And basically what he wanted to do was get together him and a bunch of his friends and go as fast as they could around a racetrack. Internationally, of course. Now, this structure of racing is pretty much attributed to how we do Grand Prix racing today, whether that be F1, IndyCar, you name it. But this guy, Gordon Bennett, in 1899 said, hey, let's go racing. I got a lot of money. I know people with a lot of money. Let's do this. So they did it for a number of years. In 1903, though, it was won by this guy, Selwyn Edges. And we'll get to his story later. But Gordon Bennett, being American, had to come up with colors to color his car so he could tell the difference between all of the other cars. So when Gordon Bennett wanted to make a racing color so he could identify his cars on the track, he decided, in complete unpatriotic form at all, to paint them red, white, and blue. Just kidding, but it was white and blue. Sometimes they did include a red rim on some of the cars. So kind of red, white, and blue, but still white and blue nonetheless. You're probably asking yourself, why don't I know of any white and blue cars? Why is this not a really popular thing? Why can't I think of white and blue in America the way I think of Ferrari and red in Italy? Well, that is simply due to the fact that in the 1950s, this guy Briggs Cunningham made these badass cars and wanted to use America's traditional racing colors. And in order to do so, he decided, because in the 30s, if you didn't know, the body was placed on top of the frame of the automobile. And the color scheme of the 30s was to paint the body white with the frame blue. Briggs, creating a car in the 50s, didn't really have a frame that was visible to the outside to paint blue. So in order to incorporate the blue somewhere else, he chose to create 2 blue pinstripes going over the top and down the center of the automobile. thus creating the iconic white and blue pinstripes design for American racing. This is pretty popular today. Other companies like Shelby have inverted the design, as well as Dan
Dodge.
Gurney's Eagle, Dodge. When did Dodge do it?
Viper.
Yep, Dodge Viper. But I'm sure now you can kind of put two and two together and kind of see like the white and blue connection with America. I just think it's funny that like we really couldn't come up with anything else. We had to go full American on this. We had to go white and blue. What are your thoughts, Jake?
Well, I mean, I am wearing a Vineyard Vines Shep shirt right now that is red, white, and blue.
Not sponsored
yet. Let's just put that out there. Vineyard Vines, hit us up. But with the use of blue and white, I see it as a nice breakaway from the solid colors that manufacturers use during the racing periods that they were most prominent. And they were a recognizable format for everybody, like with Lotus and British Racing Green with gold, then Ferrari with red and white. So I see our racing colors with Cunningham and Shelby and with Corvette as well. You see some race cars that were Corvette and they were some form of white and blue, and they were definitely a reverse idea to what the typical color schemes were.
Absolutely great point. America's clearly couldn't make up their mind. We've done our best to be creative about it, but it's kind of worked out. As to our British cousins across the pond, as I was mentioning, this guy's Selwyn Edges in the same event, this Gordon Bennett Cup. Selwyn Edges of 1903 won that race. And the way Gordon Bennett structured his racing cup was that if you won the race, you were the host next year. So Selwyn Edges, a Brit, had to go to England and say, hey, I got a bunch of rich friends. They want to race in your country. But the British government at the time had what was known as the Red Flag Acts. In case you didn't know what the Red Flag Acts were, it was basically a set of laws determining how automobiles were to operate within the country. Primarily, if an automobile were to drive down the road, and especially the road being mixed with horse and buggy carriage and automobiles and pedestrians, a pedestrian had to walk alongside the automobile carrying a red flag and a lantern and announcing the automobile's presence as it went down the road. This wasn't very conducive to motor racing at the time, so the British drivers turned to their neighbors across the channel in Ireland, who at the time didn't really have speed limits. I don't even think they'd caught up to realize that there was such thing as an automobile at the time. But they were like, yeah, sure, you want to race your fancy automobiles in our country? Go right ahead. And the British drivers, incredibly grateful for this opportunity, painted their cars a deep shade of green to resemble a shamrock. And this is how British Racing Green came about. But for some reason, we don't call it Irish Racing Green. But British Racing Green became to be one of the most well-known and recognized colors of the 20th century.
And it definitely continued on for quite a while until 68, when the governing body for the racing series of Formula One, that they could paint their sponsorship colors on the cars. And there weren't many other prominent examples because typically Lotus went with the British Racing Green and Gold. So I see where you're going with that.
Which was a Lotus invention. It was the British Racing Green and Yellow, which then turned into the British Racing Green and Gold of, was it Benetton that did
Brabham.
Brabham
did their own iteration of the green with a metallic flake added to it, and then they broke it up with the gold striping. It's more of a muted gold if you really look at it.
It's rather pale.
Anything that was used, any gold term that was used on cars at the time was somewhat muted. With another example is the Alan Mann colors. They were red and gold. They had this bright red car, but then it was a somewhat noticeable yet vibrant and muted gold on their GT40s and their Lotus Cortinas.
Yeah, and to your point about the manufacturers allowing sponsorship decals a lot more into like their motorsport liveries at the time, like let's be clear here, that was for Formula One Grand Prix racing, but like Le Mans and countries like that continued to use national colors for many years. For instance, I think it was 2010, correct me, that Bentley won Le Mans again, with it was the Bentley something or whatever.
The Bentley Speed.
Yeah, the Speed 7, I think it was. And but yeah, they used another shade of British racing green. And as well as today, we have Aston Martin using what they call British racing green. And that's going to lead me into my next point, which is when they were setting up the color of British racing green, nobody was able to keep a consistency on it. Like you couldn't tell them, oh, that is this color code and that is only British racing green and all other greens are not British racing green. British racing green was completely up to interpretation. It was a deep shade of green, and it was always meant to just resemble like a thank you to Ireland. It was a nod to Ireland. Yeah, I mean, so you can see Aston Martin's car is almost like a lime green. It's so off color compared to the Bentleys of the 30s, which are like a deep forest green, which in my opinion is too deep. I think the ideal British racing green is the Lotus. The Lotus kind of hit the nail on the head as like what green should be for British racing green.
To correct you on the latest Bentley win at Le Mans was 2001, and it debuted in 2001, and then it won the race in 2003, and then that was it. But it was also called the Bentley EXP Speed 8.
Speed 8, that's it, yes.
And that came with a Audi Bentley collaboration 4-liter 90-degree V8 twin turbo that was longitudinally mounted.
That was a sexy car, and that was a beautiful shade of green too.
What was the red line on that car?
I don't know, some insane. Modern Le Mans cars are absolutely astounding, and I would love to go to Le Mans someday to just witness that. But the fact that they can go so fast and go so long is absolutely unimaginable.
The best iteration to that comes down to two films: Ford vs Ferrari, the most recent one,
McQueen's
and
Le
then
Mans.
McQueen's iteration of Le Mans, but that was with a 917.
Both great movies. If you guys haven't seen them, definitely check them out. So Jake, you want to introduce one of our next colors we're going to talk about?
So I am a big fan of blue. I've got blue headphones. I got blue soundproofing foam. I got a lot of blue things, and my eyes are even blue. That's why.
How cute.
But yeah, they let you stare into the soul. But getting back to the point, French racing blue. That is to me, it's a gorgeous color. It's not vibrant. It's not in your face. It isn't blah or commonly used with cars, say like a Ferrari in red or a British racing green. Yes, British racing green is a great color. It shows well in lights, and you can do so much with it.
Arguably overused.
Yes, that is the case. I mean, one of my Cortinas is a green that you could consider as British racing green.
Weird flex, but okay.
But it's not my 70 GT 2-door. It's one of my wagons. But the French racing blue, you didn't really see it until right before 1910, when Moors and Panhard were competing in town-to-town sprint races. But the reason why the French went to the blue was their patriotism for the older governments, given that their government has undergone quite a few changes throughout history.
Revolution.
Yep. Not gonna lean on that subject too much, but the blue was common in the heraldry, and it was a ode to those monarch families as the country progressed and grew. And it came the the colors really kind of got muted in a lighter style that was able to easily distinguish it as well as observe it while it was performing in events. So rather than seeing a car that was burgundy or maroon compared to a car that was, say, Rosso Corsa, or one that was a Bentley that was one colored in olive green and the other one was colored in a fern green or a forest green, this was just blue, French racing blue. And that would be quickly recognized with the likes of Bugatti, Renault, Matra, the Alpines
Delahaye.
of the 70s, Delahaye. And we see some of the most iconic racing vehicles in history, like the Type 37, 35, the Type 57 tank, the Type 59 Atlantic, even though you don't
What
see
tank?
the Type 57 that was developed with Ettore and one of his sons, where the son actually died testing the vehicle.
The tank, like the Type 57
The-
Bugatti, codenamed the tank.
Yes.
Yes,
And
I thought you were thinking of an
when-
actual French tank that was painted blue, and I was like, this must be the prettiest tank on the battlefield.
Yeah, it got bedazzled and had rhinestone and some gold accents. And it had a button tuft interior. But a little bit of history on the Bugatti tank was when France was being invaded during the spark of World War II. Ettore and some employees of the manufacturer were trying to escape the oncoming forces, and they literally dug a hole for the car and buried it underground and hid it. And then after the events of the final years of World War II, they unearthed it and brought it back to its racing glory, and it's now in a well-preserved condition. Don't know where exactly it is, but Bugatti, continuing on with them, they're so proud of their history. Granted, they did start in
Very unique history too, Bugattis.
Yeah. Then they were first established in Germany, and then when the borders got reevaluated, they were placed in France technically.
Right.
Correct. Okay. And is still a prominent color in their heritage, as well as it's still created today. Their historic French racing blue shade. And you see it on cars that are customer spec'd out, or some of their special edition cars like the Pure Sport. You still see a dark gray car with Bugatti French racing blue accents all over.
I mean, yeah, you don't have to look far. I mean, just look at the Chiron. Like the general Chiron spec had a French racing blue with a darker blue as
And
a
then a tan
complementary
interior.
color. Yeah, of course. But yeah, the French racing blue is definitely one of the more overlooked kind of colors of racing colors, but definitely not one to be overstated or forgotten about, because it is just so stunning to look at, and it really commands a presence. As you said too, it stands out both in color contrast, for instance, and also just that it's such a bright color that it kind of is like, hey, here I am on the racetrack.
And speaking of color contrast, the best example that you can create for that is Renault's R25 from the 2005 season of Le Mans that of Fernando Alonso drove to his world championship.
Yep. A lot more modern history on that end, but just as much history at this point. I don't know if Mr. Alonso would appreciate us calling him a historical figure at this point, but
with his departure and returns to Formula One,
yeah.
I mean, he is now on his third stint of working in the Formula One community.
I think he's on his, I don't know. I think he's only retired once.
Quote, unquote. And for the audio listeners, I'm throwing up my air quote fingers. But another great one that Miles and I both love is the Alpine
Yep.
A110.
I've worked on one of those. They're a pain in the ass.
I've only gotten to see one on a couple of occasions, and the lines are just striking. Yes, Alpine was a third party, but now it is part of the Renault brand, and they manage and head the team for Formula One. But
today, Alpine, yes. There's the Alpine Formula One team today.
Yes, and they're a great mid-pack team. They've got a very strong and solid background as well, because they did have, until recently, Alan Prost was a contributor to their efforts in developing their car further from being a low mid-pack team to one of the top 2, top 3 contenders in the mid packs.
Yeah,
amongst
they've got
Ferrari,
a good package.
McLaren.
They've got a good package coming into 2022. Wouldn't be too surprised if I see them on some more podiums next year.
I will have to see how that 2022 season pans out. But some of my last great team that was known for painting their cars in French racing blue was Matra. They joined into Formula One in 1967, and 2 years later, they had produced a car that was qualified and strong and handling. It had everything that it needed in order to get Jackie Stewart his first World Drivers' Championship, and that was in '69. 2 years after they first come into the game.
Was Matra the overall constructor, or were they an engine builder?
They were an overall constructor. So they built and developed the chassis. The engine was a Cosworth DFV, Ford Cosworth DFV V8.
That would be why they won.
The DFV was a dominating piece in.
For those of you who don't know, the DFV is probably one of the turning point engines in Formula One history. Cosworth's
9,000 RPM.
Yeah, Cosworth's gem of an engineering marvel. Definitely look up the history on the DFV if you get a moment. It's a very entertaining tale. But yeah,
I've gotten to work with guys who are extremely experienced in rebuilding those motors, and having gotten to handle some parts for them in my previous line of work, it was definitely something that helped me fuel my passion as well as my interest in the 60s and 70s Formula One history. And that's just because I was handling their parts and I wanted to learn more about them. But they are insane motors. They're so quick revving to rev, and they produce an amazing amount of power for their generation, for their time period that they were manufactured. And there's still vehicles that are derived from them.
Yeah.
Given that they are technically out of date with the power capabilities and materials that are used in them, from titanium to magnesium parts or aluminum. A lot of things were aluminum then, and it was just insane. And aluminum magnesium mix.
Yeah, but the general architecture of the DFE is what carried on for so many years. I want to say it carried on for some 50 years after the initial inception.
It's the most successful power plant
Yeah.
in Formula One's history.
So, yeah, there you go. Thank you, Cosworth, and thank you, Matra, and thank you, French Racing Blue. So, if we were to turn our tides to those who once invaded France back in World War II, Germany was also a very, very, how would you say, dominant racing force in the early years. I mean, everyone knows German engineering, but not many people know. Yeah.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Nein. But the German racing colors are something to be debated amongst auto circles. And I'm going to warn you guys right now, we're going to say some pretty controversial things on this podcast. But those of you who may know the story, the German racing color when it first started was white. This was what goes back just to the Gordon Bennett Cup, just as all the others did. Germans chose to race in white. And if you want to know why the Germans got white for all of them, no, it doesn't have to do with any kind of Hitlery Aryan race thing. It has everything to do with they were picked in a lottery, and they just happened to be the third nation to choose their color. And they decided to be white. Germans, being white, raced their cars successfully until about the mid to late 20s, when with the SSKL ultimately in the 20s. But it was around this time that Germany was experimenting with high speed, low drag, aluminum bodywork. And you can see this is also around the time when Hitler was creating the highway systems and experimenting with the Autobahn and what was the fastest car you could go down the highway. And in this era, a streamlined body for an SSKL was formulated. This streamlined body was produced just in time for the AVUS race in Germany, which was a race used pretty much to kind of test highway speeds, or it was a track used to test highway speeds, but they would race here too. And it was a 5 miles up, 5 miles back kind of track. No real technical turns, nothing, just two straights. And they decided to bring their new streamlined body to this Avis racetrack to test it out. The new body did so well, it was 20 miles per hour faster than any other SSKL on the track at the time. Since the body was created in such record time and just barely made it for the start of the race, they didn't have time to put paint on it. So it was bare aluminum. Now, this is where the controversial thing happens. There are recordings of announcers and newspaper articles of announcers saying, "Look at the silver arrow, go." Or so it says. And this is the kind of inception / ideation to the silver arrows as we know them today. Now, I know what you're saying. You've probably all heard the story of the W25 who was too heavy and couldn't make weight and had to shave the paint off in order to make race. But I'll remind you that W35 was in 1932, around the same year as the Avis, actually a couple months after. Now, would it be too far of a stretch to say that they got the idea to take the paint off of the W25 thanks to the Avis SSKL? I don't think so. Jake, what do you think?
I see it as a similar practice with weight saving, as well as the effects of aerodynamics over the cars. Yes, they were a pretty premature and primitive thought process and formula based on the technology that they were granted at the time. So kind of like it's a good comparison can be Porsche with the development of the 917. They had a flat 12 that was NA, and then they threw a turbo on it. Then in I'm referencing Mark Donahue's
We're talking about
unfair
aerodynamics
advantage
here, though.
I know, but it's just a comparison in the development of a vehicle that's similar. So Porsche had the 917 with a flat 12, but then there was also a test mule with a flat 16.
Mhm.
But reverting back to the Mercedes deal, it's a situation where you can make the most out of it, and with the results that it can prove, it can help you further develop a vehicle and develop your ideas. When with Mercedes, they just simply ran out of time. They either chose a bad deadline, they chose a bad
Well, it wasn't so much that they
process.
ran out of time. It was that they were going to paint the car and they were going to paint it German racing white. But since the race was upon them, they just said, fuck it. Let's just run it on bare metal. And it like astonished everybody.
Exactly. And that's going into the mindset of racers from that time period all the way up to the development of like the Shelby Mustang or Shelby Cobra, where they built a hot rodded version of it, or they had a car where they just said, well, let's see what happens. Let's really just throw it on the track after we've gotten some work done and see what happens.
So if you had to put your money on the one inspiration for Germany changing their racing color to silver, what would it be?
Granted, I don't have the experiences you have working for Mercedes-Benz. I have to go with your information that you provided on this. I know of the time that they had to strip the white paint to save that kilo, but I just have to let you go on about that, with it being a rumored inspiration. If Mercedes has the access to the information through recordings and news writings and the vehicle or recreations of the vehicle being there and blueprints being in the archives for the company, then I think that further vouches the credibility of the.
Absolutely. And I would ask that everybody go check out a wonderful episode of Jay Leno's Garage where the Avis SSKL is featured, and you can understand the story a lot in more greater detail and actually see the vehicle for itself. It's not the exact one. It's a recreation that Mercedes-Benz Classic Center had made. But it is a true SSKL and in complete form fashion of how it would have been. So definitely check that out. But anyway, to complete the German racing story, it was somewhere in the 30s, whether it be the Avis or it be the W25, that Germany decided to run their cars without paint and be known as the Silver Arrows. Anyway, I bet you guys didn't know this. Did you know Belgium had racing cars? Moreover than that, do you know what Belgium's racing color was?
Green, yellow.
It was yellow.
Pink.
It was bright yellow.
Oh.
I couldn't tell you a Belgian manufacturer off the top of my head, but those must have been some bright freaking cars to go watch racing. I think the Belgian colors too, they were more like team racing, kind of like today how we have like an AlphaTauri or a I don't know, some other third-party racing team that isn't attributed to a manufacturer, be it Red Bull. How they would kind of just, they may be from Belgium, but they don't actually have a manufacturer backing them that are Belgian. So that's kind of how the Belgian cars come. There isn't too much history on it other than Belgian racing drivers at the time chose to paint their cars yellow. It's not a very popular one, so there's not much recorded history on it. But one that is similar to yellow that we may have a little bit more to talk about.
Rosso Corsa.
Yeah, best for last, baby. Ferrari red. So Rosso Corsa red, it's kind of crazy. So the Peking to Paris rally, Peking to Paris at the time was a challenge. It was issued by this French newspaper, and he basically was just asking if anybody should dare to drive from Peking in China to Paris, France by automobile, that like you are the next God. Like you are to be spoken in all four quarters of the earth. You are the ultimate epitome of man if you can accomplish this challenge. So of course, like multiple nations. I think it was 5 cars ultimately entered, but they each was representing a different nation. So Italy entered this Itala mod, and it was painted in this deep scarlet red. It was this prince, who was a rather wealthy gentleman, because cars back then were not they were not common pieces of machinery. You had to actually have a wealth. You had to have money. You had to have a reason for this. So like even on this Itala mod, that this prince had to go through Pirelli, and he had to like formulate with Pirelli how he could get his tires, because you're bound to throw tires and you get flats along the way. Make sure he has fuel, all sorts of preparations. So this wasn't just any guy could just walk up and just do this Peking to Paris. But anyway, today the Peking to Paris rally is celebrated among car enthusiasts and is actually a rally where anybody these days, unlike back then, can enter a car and drive from Peking, China, to Paris, France. A grueling, I think it's some 5,000, 9,000. Jake, do you know how long the actual rally is?
I don't know how long the rally is, but at the time when the first race took place, these are two additional side notes that I wanted to make. 40 total entries were submitted through the listing in that French newspaper, and then after the event was completed, the official timestamp was 61 days. And from my quick note reading, I see it as a 5,000, almost 6,000 mile journey. And it was through rain, sleet, hot desert weather. It was just almost unbearable and grueling at that time frame, when there was no enclosed cars, there was no high speed routes, there was nothing. You had to pre-plan your map out days in advance and have a backup plan, and then a backup to that backup plan in the event anything goes wrong naturally. Could have been a border conflict, could have been weather, could have been just a disagreement between a farmer and another motorist.
So yeah, I have it up here. It's the actual trek. At least today, when they do the rally, is a 36-day event, and it encompasses almost 10,000 miles. But it actually does go through Moscow. So as you're saying, when they stopped in Moscow for the meeting with a bunch of rich people to eat their food.
It was a detour.
Yes.
He was in Moscow and received his invitation, and then he took the detour up to St. Petersburg.
Ah, gotcha. There we go.
But to wrap that subject up, it is the pinnacle event that cemented and created the basis for the Rosso Corsa name, where all manufacturers and racers dedicated their motor vehicles into the history books by wearing and sporting these colors at their events. And it's still seen today, as we previously mentioned, with the Ferrari Raceworks teams wearing a car wearing red, or their fireproof suits having the Italian flag or something that is themed towards Italy.
I mean, just look at Scuderia Ferrari in Formula One. They're entirely enamored by red. But if you wanted to say paint your walls in this exact shade of red, it is known as Rosso Corsa. And the accomplishment of these guys finishing this race in the manner they did was just such a great feat at the time, which, I mean, it was predicated by the newspaper, obviously, saying that whoever should do this is going to be a national hero. It inspired Italy, rather, to formulate the Rosso Corsa red as their national racing color. And it's been raced since then, unending. I don't think Italy has ever changed their race color.
No, they have not. And these days, we also see automotive enthusiasts repainting their cars in Rosso Corsa or different derivatives or different shades of what they imagine Rosso Corsa can be.
Absolutely. And to your point too, like you can also draw derivatives to how red is synonymous now with the ultimate epitome of a sports car. It's like, I mean, the Dodge Viper, for instance, American car, but it's most famous for being in red. And I can think of it, the Corvette, also famous, my little red Corvette. It's famous for being red. But all of these is because I think like the color red became so synonymous with fast cars that it stems all the way back to this Peking to Paris rally. We hope you enjoyed our rendition of the stories and tales behind multiple different racing colors. And if you have anything to add or would like to join the conversation, definitely give us hit us up on our new website that is launching this week, themotorist.net.org.store, podcast.com, and many others. It will also be linked in our Instagram, which is another place you should definitely hit us up because that is the best way to get in touch with us. If you have an idea for a podcast episode or have something you would love to hear, definitely hit us up on there. Thank you for giving us a listen and giving us an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. And we may be just starting off in this podcast and media realm, but we plan to be here for a while. So right on. See you guys next time.